I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Iran. Is there a bright future for nuclear talks? On Tuesday, Iran's President Rouhani addressed the UN General Assembly for the first time, speaking of engagement, moderation, and dialogue. But even more important were the signals given by Iran's Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. First in a meeting with the European Union's Catherine Ashton, and then in a meeting with the representatives of the 5+1 powers, Zarif spoke of the possibility that nuclear talks could finally bring an agreement over Tehran's uranium enrichment program. But before the powers meet with Tehran next month in Geneva, what should we be looking for? Here is your 4-point guide to success, failure, or something in between. Point 1, the diplomatic dance. Over the next few weeks, watch very carefully to see what the Iranians do. See if they continue to talk about engagement. See if they talk about the need for a two-way relationship in which they keep some nuclear rights, but they also make some concessions to the West's demands for inspection and supervision. Watch for the Americans. Will they possibly give a signal that they are willing to talk now about sanctions, as well as respecting Iran's right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium? But even more important at some points, watch for the brokers in between. Watch for the Russians, who the Iranians will try to use if they want to play hardball with the negotiations, and watch for the Europeans. Watch for the European Union and Catherine Ashton, who is the lead negotiator for the 5+1 powers. If they keep pushing forward for genuine two-way talks in Geneva, then it is more likely that we're looking at success rather than failure. But that brings us to point 2. What should the Americans be doing? What will they do? If there's any hope for these talks to succeed, the Americans have to give signals on 2 fronts. First, they have to be willing to talk about reciprocity in the sense that if the Iranians agree to inspections, that they can have enrichment of uranium up to 5%. They have to agree as well that if the Iranians give up enrichment of uranium to 20%, which is still for civilian use, that the West will guarantee a supply, for example, to keep Iran's medical reactors going. And the Americans have to do a second thing. They have to make a genuine commitment that if an agreement is reached, they will begin to pull back sanctions. Sanctions on Iran's energy sector, on its financial sector, on areas such as transport and automobile production. If the Americans do not do either of these things, then we are looking more at failure than at any possibility of success. And that brings us to point 3. Still in the United States, watch for a backlash. What has happened over the past couple of weeks is that the spirit of engagement has temporarily quieted the voices in the U.S. Congress and their allies who have been speaking about Iran's mischief, evil, duplicity. Look for those voices to try to hit back over the next few weeks. For congressmen to say that the Iranians are just simply trying to buy time before they actually unleash a nuclear bomb. Look for allies of these congressmen, so-called think tanks like the Institute for Science and International Security, who bring out scare stories such as Iran's thousands of centrifuges or its plutonium reactor being built in Iraq. Indeed, some of these scare stories are already out. In recent days, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New Yorker have all put forth major articles talking not only about the Supreme Leader possibly pulling back President Rouhani, but about another dark, sinister force, a man named Qasem Soleimani, the head of an elite military force called the Quds Force. Those stories say Rouhani actually doesn't have the power. It is these people who are anti-American who do. If those stories continue to circulate, and if Congress in particular raises its voice, then it will be much tougher to get success. And that brings us to point 4. Not in the United States, but in Iran. Will there be a backlash there? There are still hardliners who do not want to deal with the West, not even for a nuclear agreement. The Revolutionary Guards have been very much opposed to Rouhani's engagement and have tried to undercut him in the media. Some hardline MPs have been talking about Rouhani giving away Iran's sovereignty and rights. The Supreme Leader helped check these forces last week when he gave his endorsement to Rouhani's engagement, calling it heroic flexibility, the need to compromise with one's enemies. But if the hardliners begin to get the Supreme Leader's ear, or even more importantly, if they begin to defy the Supreme Leader, then the chances are going to be more difficult to get an agreement. And indeed, there's a strange intersection of points here. The allies against an agreement are those people in the United States who say Iran is not to be trusted, who are linked up with those people in Iran who say the Americans are not to be trusted. The real battle over the next few weeks is whether that language of mistrust and of evil overtakes the language of moderation, dialogue, and engagement. It is there whether success or failure, or something in between, will be decided when finally we get genuine talks over the nuclear issue in Geneva in October. I'm Scott Lucas, and this has been EA's Worldview on Iran for today.